Welcome back to Area Diesel Service. Today we have another exciting and delicious collaborative effort with fellow YouTube content creator, the History Channel. Just kidding. While you might have guessed I am a fan of potato chips, that is not what is in this box. And the History Channel I refer to is our good friends over at DirtPerfect, where they live about 2 or 3 months behind the timeline of reality. Just kidding. If you didn't come to us from DirtPerfect's channel, please go over there, check him out, and tell him that we sent you. I think you'll find some very entertaining content over there, where the boys are always getting into some kind of shenanigans, primarily focused on the excavation type of operations, but they get into all kinds of repairs, different trips, and things of that nature. So check them out. Good folks over there. I was a little surprised when I got a call from DP and he asked me if I thought I might be able to help him. I told him, if there's any way possible, you know that I will try. Mike explains to me that they have a 2001 International T444E powered school bus, converted camping rig of sorts, painted robin egg blue.
You guys that don't know, this is Jenna's camper bus. Her and the kids have been tooling around and camping in most of the summer. We bought this thing out of Nashville, Tennessee.
And they were tooling along, headed out for a family weekend, and she went pop.
That's the way the money goes, pop goes the weasel.
She lacked power, and that was the end of the road. They eased her onto the shoulder, nursed her down to the filling station, and she was dead in the water. As you well know, DP is very mechanically inclined. Didn't take him long to figure out that they had shucked a turbo. He was unable to locate one and make the repair on the side of the road. So they drugged this dude home, went on about their way. When they got back from their weekend, they reached out. I said, well, ship it to me and let me see what I can do. We're gonna open this dude up and make an initial assessment. My initial assessment is that this thing almost didn't make it here. It's a good time to remind you to try and do your best to package these components. They're expensive and they're hard enough to fix them when they break on the engine. We all know that these little trucks running around don't necessarily care too much about what's inside these boxes, and this one almost didn't make it. So we're gonna open her up and have a look. Okay, he must have known it's my birthday, and he also must have known that I like cake, because it says let's eat cake. I know you would have never guessed that I like cake. International T444E. This is a V8 engine, HUE fuel system, hydraulically actuated electronic unit injector, direct injected diesel engine, waste-gated turbocharger as you see here, and the T444E is effectively the same as the 7.3 liter Powerstroke, an engine that was built and manufactured and sold to Ford by International, and they also sold it under the T444E badge to International chassis and likely some other applications out there. As I've been informed, she went pop and lost power, and I can tell you, the shaft is broken in half, right? There's a common shaft that connects the turbine wheel to the compressor wheel, and it's broke. That is the pop that he heard. When the shaft broke, the turbo quit providing air to the engine, and the level of power being produced went down dramatically, and I would imagine the level of smoke being produced went up dramatically. On the bottom, this contraption we refer to as the pedestal. And again, this is a V8 engine, and this turbocharger resides in the valley of the engine. Instead of mounting to an exhaust manifold like you would traditionally see, the turbo mounts to the engine itself, and then the exhaust is plumbed up to it. Pedestal slash mounting bracket. This pedestal also contains an additional device, an electromagnetic solenoid. That solenoid operating on this arm connected to this linkage, and this linkage connected to this valve. and this is cold start assist. The computer tells the solenoid to close the valve. The valve restricts the flow of exhaust leaving the turbo and backs up that heat and that energy to soak in to the turbo and soak in to the engine. When the engine warms up, this valve would open, everything goes back to normal. You will find some folks in the aftermarket utilizing this as effectively an exhaust brake. It really works very well. As you can see, it's got what looks like a throttle blade or a butterfly right in the flow of exhaust, right? Exhaust leaving the engine is introduced here, goes around, drives the turbine wheel, and exits here out the muffler. And if you choke that off, you will have effectively engine braking. This unit is also wastegated in an effort to control turbocharger speed. And because speed is roughly relevant to boost pressure, we send a boost pressure signal to this canister. There's a diaphragm and a spring. And when the boost pressure gets high enough to exceed the pressure of the spring, it operates this rod, which opens another valve inside the turbine housing and lets exhaust gas leaving the engine bypass the turbine wheel and not drive the turbo. The other thing a little bit different about this arrangement and the pedestal, generally you would see an external oil line plumbed in to roughly the top or 12 o'clock of the bearing housing, and you would see a drain line connected to the bottom or 6 o'clock. This unit, again, just a little bit different. The pedestal now becomes those connections. Small hole here being oil supplied to the turbo. You can see an annulus passing through here, and then the big one here is the drain, the oil falling away from the turbo and returning to the sump. Nothing big, nothing difficult, just a little bit different. This unit, if you haven't seen, is a Garrett turbocharger. Area Diesel Service is a Garrett turbocharger master distributors. Factory authorized, directly sourcing turbos and components from the manufacturer. Garrett was the OEM supplier to International when they built the engine, and Area Diesel, being a factory authorized master distributor, is able to obtain and repair the factory OEM components. Our hope is to perform a rebuild of this unit and bring you along for some interesting turbocharger content, but this dude's in pretty bad shape. I can see when the shaft busted, the compressor wheel went sideways in a catastrophic manner, has been completely destroyed. Because of the level of catastrophe, it's likely that the compressor housing is also completely destroyed. Sometimes we can save a housing, right? We'll clean it up, and wherever the material has been damaged or removed, we can build that up and remachine the contour. Perhaps we can look at doing that. Likely these components are available, and that would become uneconomical to do so, but we just don't know at this point what we're getting into. Your shaft broke, but why? Well, there's a large variety of things that can cause your shaft to snap. One of them being turbo overspeed, but because this turbocharger has a wastegate, or basically an overspeed protection device, we generally wouldn't find that to be the case. And if I had to guess, they probably weren't hot rodding this school bus out to the campground.
The motor on the bus goes vroom, 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 all through the town.
But I've seen stranger things. Another common root cause for shaft breakage is lubrication and or lack thereof, or lack of quality lubrication. I don't know the maintenance schedule of DP school bus, but I think we all know that it looks like those boys take care of their stuff. They change their oil regularly, and there's some oil coming out of this thing, and it doesn't look great, but diesel engine oil rarely does. What it does tell me, at least to some degree, is that there is the presence of engine oil coming to this turbocharger. We can generally get a pretty good idea based on the visual inspection of the internal components what is the root cause failure. One thing about school bus and or similar applications, trash trucks, things that are very regularly going from start to stop, start to stop, start to stop. That is kind of hard on turbochargers, because every time you do that, this turbocharger is increased in speed. Then you go to pick up the next kid and you slow it down again. You pick them up, go down the road to get the next one. So we call it cycle fatigue, but the more times that you run that turbo up and bring it down, up and down, the speed and those forces to spool the turbo, it's kind of like if you bend a piece of sheet metal enough times, eventually that sheet metal will snap off. Same thing, cycle fatigue is hard on these components. I don't necessarily know at this point that we're going to contribute the failure to cycle fatigue, but the possibility exists. Probably the last of the common reasons that your shaft might snap in half, foreign object damage. Turbochargers of this era likely run in the 50, 80,000 RPM type of speed. And as you might imagine, if you're tooling along at 50,000 RPMs and you ingest a hard piece of metal, the force at which you're met is significant and something's got to give. You know, sometimes we'll see an exhaust valve stuck in the turbine housing. That's catastrophic. Sometimes we'll find a wing nut or a piece of hardware that was left in the filtration system that got drawn into the turbo. The turbo lit up, the air was flowing hard, it sucked that nut in, and whammo, she's gone in an instant. It sounded like Mike was just tooling along, and then bang, explosion. Potentially would lend to the foreign object damage scenario. Really too soon to tell. Sometimes when we experience a catastrophic failure, as we have here, it can be difficult to really pinpoint and determine what caused the initial issue. Keep in mind, it's 23 years old, it's got 172,000 stop and go miles. It might have just shucked a turbo. We're going to tag this unit up, send it back to the turbo shop. They are going to perform their normal disassembly, cleanup, inspection, estimation of repairs. We're going to bring you along for some of the process, and we're going to determine if we can repair or if we need to replace the turbocharger from DP's Robin Egg Blue school bus.
Here's our turbo. It's been sent in with the pedestal. And here, this is not a good sign. So these Garrett turbos use a 12-point bolt. As you can see, they're worn. And so that's going to cause an issue. And they're used throughout the entire turbo. So there's 7 on this side. There's 4 in the center, 5 or so on the outside. As I'm shocking the bolts, so I have a blunt pick, I'm putting it on top, and I'm just hitting down with a large hammer. I like to soak the bolts, but all the threads are down in this part, not up in here. Maybe we'll get lucky and these will zip right out. Oh, that was a good one. So that was 4 of the 7. The other ones I'm going to give a little bit more tender loving care to. This time side to side I will do with a sharpened pick. It gets the bolt a little bit more loose. And I just repeat the process. Eventually this is either going to give or I'm going to bust the head off, which just means more work later to have to draw bolts. Hey, look at that. We won. That exposes this turn wheel. Flip it over and just keep taking bolts out. Same bolts, just now it's an aluminum. These don't have anywhere near the hold. Hopefully these just come right out. Yeah. Pretty good snap. Not great. For this wheel, this is going to have to be completely replaced. This junk. Turbine wheel also, because the shaft is snapped. The compressor housing has taken some damage from the wheel hitting it. Possibly could be reusable. We would bake it, clean it, and then we would buff the area. But what gets me concerned right here is this line. It doesn't feel like it's like more materials removed from one side or the other. So it could clean up pretty good still. Now is where we would chuck it up. I have a special holder that holds that wheel, and then I would have to detorque the compressor wheel. That would come up, and that would allow me to get to this next step. There's 4 more bolts there. That's what holds the backplate on. When that all broke, this wheel would have wiggled. This here where my thumb kind of is pointing, there should be a lip there where all that oil's at. That lip is missing because now it is all right up in here in the such collar piece. So this back plate is also damaged. It's non-usable. See if I can lift this out. It might be jammed. Yeah, to get down, it looks like our metal here has kind of, you know, galled it together. This should just lift right up off of the what part of that shaft's there, but it's not. I'm gonna try to remove these two again as they go across in there. Basically, I'm not able to get to the bolt head. Good sign. But it worked. When it comes to R&Rs and warranties, I'm usually the first person that sees them because I'm going to probably be the one that puts them back together. So me seeing how they go apart, there's no surprise later when they come to me and I have to go figure out, hey, you tore it apart. What was the story here? I'll give it a few moments here to give it a soak, and then I will try it again here. Through the sweet power of editing, these will come out. I have now finished the turbo. I went through all the parts, and what I've done here is I've listed my thoughts. When turbos come in, I usually write down what it came with. Came with a pedestal. We don't actually have a sure way to check these, so it'll be getting replaced. So going through all the parts and coming down, the back plate was damaged, the wheels are damaged, the slinger was damaged. That's for parts that I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to reuse. We'll be able to reuse compressor housing, the turbine housing. The bearing housing will have to go through a couple more steps, but it should be reusable. And then the actuator, as you saw when I was tearing it down, I had some air to it, so I know that it actuated, so I feel like it's still pretty good. So we're going to need some new wheels, back plate, and a pedestal. All right, so when it leaves my room, it comes into the dirty room. We got this sweet oven here. I went ahead and put the parts that I know that we're going to be able to save in here. And it gets baked at 600 degrees for many hours. And when it comes out, it will be similar to the parts here. Baking it helps loosen up all of the soot, the oil, and makes the cleaning step much easier than trying to say clean it as it is here. The wet oil part will dry up. We usually bake overnight, and then by the time we get back in the next morning, we'll have baskets of stuff ready to clean. All right, it's the next morning. Here's our parts getting baked. We're gonna move them over to a bench and we'll take a look at them. We'll get some thoughts, and then we'll continue to move on through the process. So this is all parts that we know that are good, while these are, well, minus this, these are all the parts that we know we'll have to replace. All right, so the parts that went through the sandblaster, they went from being rusty. This is kind of how they look when parts come out. This kind of this dull color. Here's the bearing housing. Here's the discharge valve. And then here's our compressor housing. It's a little duller when it comes out. We went ahead and ran it through the polisher, which makes it look slightly shinier. Gives it a nice coat. And then the turbine housing also went through the sandblaster. But while these were being cleaned, we went ahead and stuck this up, and we put a paint coat over it. It's like a retardant instead of using oil. I'm gonna put oil on these parts. This we just leave, we put a paint on it. It makes it look nice too. The heat shield, I ended up having to hit it pretty hard to get it off after it baked. So I kind of damaged it here, but I can see where the wheel has hit. So I'm gonna actually replace this. So I'm gonna go get what I need, and then I will proceed to rebuild this turbo so we can get it done. Gathered all of my parts. I've oiled the bearing housing and the exhaust adapter. And so let's just go over it one more time of what we're replacing here to make this build happen. Got myself a new turbine wheel, got myself a new compressor wheel, back plate, pedestal, and then what I just called the guts. So new bearings, piston rings, thrust bearing, new rubber O-rings, bolts. Grabbed another heat shield. Let's see if we can get this back together. So these turbos are a little different when it comes to how they get built. And it's more or less this style of turbo. Usually we build a cartridge, which is wheel to wheel and all the stuff in between, and then we put that cartridge inside of one of the housings. I like to put in the compressor housing first. Then we'll flip it into the other housing, and that's how we make a turbo. So heat shield, we're gonna go ahead and put that in place. Got our piston ring. We're gonna get it in our groove, like so. And then these bearings don't have retaining rings in the bearing housing to hold them in place. So I put a little bit of oil already on the shaft. But the bearing goes on, a spacer goes on, and then the other bearing, and then the spacer, well, spaces the bearings out. Gonna put some oil on this bearing, and as I slide it through the bearing housing, it'll all get smushed down onto the other bearing. And I just give it a little pop. And then normally we would just keep building the cartridge, but on these, we didn't take this part, this up to this step. And we're gonna set it down into the turbine housing. I'm gonna put some Loctite. On this style of turbo, these bolts in the center, we've seen them back out, so we've been putting Loctite, which we've always been putting Loctite on them. Definitely try to make sure that they don't back out, because that's just bad. And I just get them flush here first. And then I will go on a crisscross pattern to tighten the bolts all in. And I'm doing it that way to ensure that it's seated right and that it's not jammed to one side. And I can check that as I go by kind of spinning the wheel. If right now this wheel was hitting the housing because it was jammed, I would feel it rubbing, and I would just back them out and kind of start over again. Once I do a crisscross, I'll just rotate and go around one more time, making sure these are good and snug and they're not just hand tight in there. So that's good. I call this piece a slinger. I believe that's what Garrett calls it. We're gonna put a piston ring on this groove, just like that. Just snaps down in there. Then our back plate, I call it the plus sign. Cross, that's the O-ring. It goes in here like this. And then this thrust bearing sits in here like this, and it only will sit in one way. No other way will it be allowed to be taken in. With the way it's all cut out, it only sits in one way. Knowing that's going to go in this way, I'm going to put a little bit of oil on our pads already. And then our slinger kind of snaps into the back plate. Pre-oil stage they talk about when in the instructions, we kind of go a little further. We oil it as we go. This part of the thrust bearing here is where the oil will make contact, be dripped in, and then it will be moved and pulled down this galleyway. This part and this hole is what aligns. So I'm just going to flip it over and set it down. There are 4 more bolts that go in here, and they too get a little bit of Loctite. And then the exact same setup. I just hand tighten them down until it's flush, and then I will tighten them down more to make sure that our back plate is seated correctly and is, again, not to one side, so that way when we get to the installing the compressor housing, our wheels won't rub the housing. Wheel still spins, everything still feels good. While we're at this part, I'm going to go ahead and put the O-ring on. We have a device that we've used to help hold the wheel when the turbine housing and the wheel is all sitting here, so that way we can get our wheel torqued. So the wheels won't spin now, and then I can bring down the other wheel. It goes back down, and while it's in here, I should be able to spin it. I'm rocking it just a little, everything feels okay. We got our compressor housing. Now, the back plate and the way that thrust bearing went in, how it had to line with the oil feed hole, all of that, and then with it being in the turbine housing, all this is how the orientation is set. And the same can be said with these back plates. This wall here, and as you can see, it kind of swirls down or up, however you want to look at it. Well, the compressor housing has a similar matching pattern of where this is going to line up here. So it already, I can't change the orientation on these turbos. So these turbos are pretty much built to the orientation they need to be in. Just like everything else, I like to just go ahead and hand tighten down. Slowly bring the housing down on it. The O-ring wasn't sticking out, but it was pretty tight, so it was good on there. A loose O-ring might hang out, and then you risk right now pinching it, and then later finding out you have a leak. As I got them hand tight, I go in a star pattern. There's happens to be 5 on this side, and I just tighten them back. Tighten them all down, and as I spin it with one finger, at the other end, I try to just kind of like load the wheel a little to see if I can make it hit the housing. We don't want to hit the housing, that would be bad, so everything is good. Do the same thing, I spin it with my left, try to overload it with my right. Everything seems pretty good. I normally would put caps here, put a little bit of oil. I will put a little bit of oil here in a little bit, but we are going to put the pedestal back on. And wouldn't you know it, same way, hand tighten the bolts. The actuator. I have an air regulator. It doesn't take much. We're just bringing this down a little bit to attach. There we go. And we'll kill the air. I'll give it a little bit more. Just make sure we're moving. We are. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and apply some oil into the oil intake here, just as a prelude. And then we have our drain and our oil in, and well, it matches the same drain and oil in, but this way because we need to attach it to here. Fresh bolts. I have to do some wiggle and jiggle here, but I'll get that installed on. This is going to face up, and our bolts are going to come down through and connect. I'll show you that when it's done. It's a little awkward to try to hold and film. Just took a moment. Maybe see we're on there, up against where it should be. So we'll get this attached here. All right, I got the manifold on, got it clipped in. This now becomes our oil drain and inlet. See about putting some plugs in for shipping. All right, so got it all fully built. I put a cap on the actuator. So now what I'm going to do is make a tag, and we'll place it right there. So we take the information of the part number, our serial number, plug it in this computer, sends it over to the laser. Our information is now on the tag. Then I'm going to tack it on there. We will also be sending, we just call it the install kit, but it has some extra O-rings and O-rings that are needed for when installing this onto the bus that it came off of. So there it is.
We made it back to the parts counter. This is the turbocharger off of what has been named Delores. We're going to call her Enormous Delores because she's a great big bus. Turbo is done. You saw what went down. We're going to review a little bit of the carnage. Pedestal. Again, this is a V8 engine, valley mounted turbocharger. It does have an electromagnetic solenoid and an oil pressure operated actuator. It's off, it's in our hands, they're prone to failure. We're getting a new one. We talked about right out of the gate, we had complete catastrophic shaft breakage. The shaft that's sticking out of the compressor wheel here used to be part of the common shaft with the turbine wheel here. The shaft plumb snapped in half. And why did that happen? Well, we can't necessarily always be definitive, but in this example, we can see evidence of radial marking in the journal bearings, and we can see evidence of wear. We see those radial markings on both the ID and the OD of the journal bearing. So the oil in Enormous Delores at one point or another was contaminated. There is undisputed evidence of grit having been in the oil and contacted the bearings between the bearing housing and the turbine wheel. The theory is, because these bearings have worn, the clearance between them, and we can feel them on the shaft, a little looser than we would generally like them. The clearance allows for shaft motion. When the shaft motion starts to go, you get contact between the compressor wheel and the compressor housing. When you start to get contact between the wheel and housing, you lose the balance. This is an extremely precisely balanced component on both ends of the operation. And when you get some contact, you throw it out of balance. You already had excessive clearance in your bearings. Now you've got contact throwing an imbalance into the situation, and you get even more shaft motion. Shaft motion is the absolute enemy in turbocharger survival. Kind of a chicken or the egg. Bearing went first, allowed a little bit of contact. The imbalance caused shaft motion that was exaggerated by the excessive play, which then caused more contact and more imbalance until, boom, it exploded. That was the end of the road, right? The bus pulled over and the phone rang at Area Diesel. Shaft was a boat anchor. Compressor wheel was a boat anchor. The service components are always replaced. Heat shield suffered some damage. Right there, she was kissed pretty good. Inexpensive and readily available. That was replaced. And the back plate where the compressor wheel normally resides also suffered some catastrophic damage, also replaced. So that's what we think happened. That's how and why it failed. This is a Garrett TP38 style turbocharger, T444E engine. Very, very similar, virtually identical to a Powerstroke 7.3 liter. The turbocharger in its later Powerstroke life went on to be known as a GTP38 turbocharger. Very, very similar. The rebuilding process of this turbo, virtually identical to that of its Powerstroke counterparts, and many of the parts are even interchangeable. The only difference is horsepower rating of the T444E is different than the Powerstroke equivalent, so the components in the turbocharger are different. Many of the other engine accessory components are likely different as well. For sake of procedural repair, same thing. You saw the process, brought it in broken, tore it down, cleaned it up, inspected it, got some new components, reassembled, calibrated the actuator, added a new pedestal while we're there. What did it cost? As per usual, the $1 million question. $600 to fix a turbo, $400 for a pedestal, $1038.36. $1,000 affair. We also have in stock the brand new pedestal we referred to, so if you only need a pedestal. We also have in stock brand new Garrett authentic turbocharger for enormous Delores. Remember, we spoke earlier, we are a factory authorized master distributor of the Garrett turbocharger product line, one of I think about 10 master distributors in the United States. So we've got new stuff, we've got service components, we've got remanufacturing capabilities. Should you find yourself in need of a Garrett turbocharger or really any turbocharger repair or replacement, Area Diesel can help you out. If your preference is brand new or if your time frame is sensitive, brand new authentic OEM turbocharger on the shelf, just under $800. $600 to fix it, $800 to replace it. Could be $200 well spent, but we have absolutely no concerns about this remanufactured turbocharger, restored back to factory clearance specifications, new components on the inside. This dude's gonna go for a long, long time again. If you didn't come to us from DirtPerfect, or in this instance, Mrs. DirtPerfect, please go over there, check them out, tell them that we sent you. If you need anything in regards to turbochargers or diesel fuel injection or any other diesel engine component, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. You can call us at 800-637-2658. You can log on to our website at areadieselservice.com, where you'll find a large amount of high quality information and the ability to chat instantly with a diesel engine expert through the button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can drop us an email at parts@areadiesel.com, or you can stop by any of our locations in Iowa, Illinois, or Indiana. However you decide to reach out, please remember that our goal at Area Diesel Service is to provide a high-quality customer experience along with a high-quality component or a high-quality repair. So we would appreciate an opportunity to earn your business. We're fair and we're honest and we're competent. We're going to pack this thing up with great care and concern to ensure proper and safe delivery. We're going to ship it out to DP and the crew. We're going to send them a little Area Diesel banner. Maybe they can pop that up in the repair shop. And I noticed that they've got their hats all sweaty and sowed up over there. So we'll throw in some merch. Remember, if you need something and reach out to us, let us know you learned of us on YouTube. We'll also throw you some merch, whatever we've got at the time. Hats, gloves, fender covers, etc. That's it. Thanks for watching.